Liborio Barney Bellomo's story is one of power, loyalty, and survival. Released from prison in 2008, Bellomo returned to a new mafia underworld, one filled with snitches, flip bosses, and law enforcement shifting focus away from organized crime. But Bellomo had something others didn't. He was groomed for leadership by the legendary Vincent Gigante, and soon, he emerged as the new boss of the Genovese crime family. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind Bellomo's rise, his ties to infamous racketeering charges, and the alleged million-dollar real estate empire that keeps him in control. Liborio Barney Bellomo, born on January 8, 1957, is a name that has become synonymous with power within the American Mafia. As of today, Bellomo is recognized as one of the most influential figures in organized crime, having risen to lead the notorious Genovese crime family, considered the most dominant mafia family in the United States. His journey to the top began early, and by 1990, Vincent Gigante, the family's boss at the time, had handpicked Bellomo to serve as the acting boss while Gigante himself faced increasing pressure from federal authorities. It was a role that came with immense power, but also tremendous risk, as Bellomo quickly found out when he became a prime target for law enforcement. In 1996, the FBI zeroed in on Bellomo, launching an intense investigation into his activities, particularly his alleged involvement in the 1991 murder of Ralph DeSimone. DeSimone, a drug dealer, was discovered in the trunk of his car at a LaGuardia airport parking lot, shot 5 times. Authorities believe DeSimone, along with another victim, Anthony DiLorenzo, had been executed because the Genovese hierarchy suspected them of being government informants. According to testimony from Alphonse Darco, a high-ranking member of the Lucchese family who had turned informant, Bellomo had authorized the hit on DeSimone. Despite the serious allegations, Bellomo steadfastly maintained his innocence, and he was subjected to a rigorous round of polygraph tests, all of which he passed. In each of these tests, Bellomo consistently denied any knowledge of the murder. But the FBI wasn't satisfied with the results. They suspected Bellomo might have been using lithium, a psychoactive drug known to influence polygraph outcomes. Agents went to extreme lengths, even visiting Bellomo in prison where they forcibly shaved his head and took samples of his body hair, including from his arms and legs, in search of traces of the drug. However, when the results came back, there was no sign of lithium in Bellomo's system. With the tests proving negative, the authorities had no choice but to drop the murder charges against him. Bellomo's defense team argued that, given the reliability of the polygraph results and the credibility of the polygraphers, there was no basis for the accusations, and both Bellomo and his associate, Generoso, were factually and legally innocent of any involvement in the killings. Still, Bellomo's legal troubles were far from over. As the leader of the Genovese family, his involvement in a range of criminal activities had made him a target for the FBI's broader crackdown on organized crime. Ultimately, Bellomo and dozens of other Genovese family members were caught up in a sweeping case that included charges of labor racketeering, illegal gambling operations, and the extortion of vendors during the San Gennaro Festival, an event that had long been a stronghold for mafia extortion rackets. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Bellomo opted for a plea deal. He agreed to a 10-year prison sentence and was required to forfeit $250,000 in illicit profits as part of the agreement. On July 13, 2001, while still serving time in prison, Liborio Barney Bellomo received news that the FBI wasn't quite done with him. Even behind bars, the authorities were continuing to scrutinize his activities, and this time the focus was on money laundering. Bellomo was implicated in a scheme involving the laundering of stolen union funds, allegedly carried out in collaboration with Thomas Caffaro. Thomas was no ordinary associate. He was the son of Vincent Fish Caffaro, a former soldier in the Genovese family who had flipped and become an informant back in 1986 after facing a slew of serious charges himself. Despite Vincent's betrayal, his son Thomas had chosen a different path, one marked by loyalty to the Mafia code of silence. In this new indictment, Bellomo was accused of being deeply involved in money laundering operations that stemmed from the Genovese family's control over the Waterfront rackets, particularly through their influence in the International Longshoremen's Association. According to the charges, Bellomo had been instrumental in concealing funds stolen from the ILA's pension accounts between 1996 and 1997. The authorities believed this was part of a larger operation where union money was being siphoned off for mob use. Rather than face a long, drawn-out trial, Bellomo once again opted to plead guilty to lesser charges, a strategic move that extended his prison stay, pushing his release date further back from 2004. Thomas Cafaro, standing alongside Bellomo in this case, proved to be just as steadfast as his father had once been, at least in his unwillingness to cooperate with the authorities. If the FBI had hoped that Thomas might follow in his father's footsteps and start spilling secrets about his mob superiors, they were sorely disappointed. Thomas Cafaro chose loyalty over leniency, accepting a 7-year prison sentence without betraying the Genovese family. Despite the pressure, he refused to become an informant, demonstrating the same kind of unbreakable allegiance that had long been a hallmark of the Mafia's inner circle. The intricate web of loyalties within the Mafia became even more apparent when George Barone, another Genovese member who had turned informant, began providing details about the dynamics between Bellomo, Vincent Fish Cafaro, and his son, Thomas. Barone revealed that, even though Vincent Cafaro had cooperated with the FBI in the past, he hadn't fully disclosed everything he knew about the Genovese family. According to Barone, there was an unspoken agreement between Bellomo and Vincent that Cafaro would withhold certain information, and in exchange, Bellomo would ensure that no harm came to Thomas as retribution for his father's partial betrayal. In other words, Bellomo had essentially shielded Thomas from any Mafia backlash that might have arisen due to his father's decision to cooperate with the authorities, thus preserving a delicate balance within the family. This revelation painted a complex picture of the loyalty-driven relationships that often characterized Mafia dealings. Despite the treacherous nature of mob life, where betrayals were commonplace, there were still lines of respect and protection that were not crossed. The intricate maze of allegiances, where fathers could cooperate with the FBI while their sons remained loyal to the Mafia, spoke to the convoluted nature of power and trust within the crime families. Bellomo's involvement in the Waterfront rackets didn't end with his initial plea deal. In 2003, following further investigation into the Genovese family's control over labor unions on the New York and New Jersey docks, Bellomo was again forced to face the legal consequences of his actions. This time, he pleaded guilty to labor racketeering charges, which tacked on an additional 4 years to his already lengthy prison sentence. These labor-related indictments underscored the far-reaching power the Genovese family had over the docks and the union workers, a control that was deeply rooted in decades of Mafia infiltration and manipulation of legitimate industries. On February 23, 2006, Liborio Barney Bellomo and more than 30 members of the Genovese crime family found themselves facing yet another wave of legal battles when they were indicted on a series of new racketeering charges. This was not an unfamiliar situation for Bellomo, who had long been under the watchful eye of law enforcement. However, this particular indictment carried a grave accusation that reached deep into his personal circle. Bellomo was charged with orchestrating the murder of Ralph Coppola, a man who had not only been the acting captain of Bellomo's crew but also one of his close friends. Coppola had disappeared on September 16, 1998, just a few weeks before he was scheduled to be sentenced on fraud charges. His sudden disappearance was no small mystery, as his body was never found. The government alleged that Bellomo, while still imprisoned, had given the order for Coppola's murder. The key witness in this case was Peter Paluzzo, a former lawyer for the Genovese family who had since turned informant. According to Paluzzo, he had acted as a messenger, delivering Bellomo's instructions from prison to have Coppola killed. The reasons behind the order remained somewhat unclear, with differing reports circulating. Some claimed that Coppola had been disrespectful, a serious offense in the Mafia world, while others suggested that he had been stealing money from the family's profits, which would have been an equally fatal mistake. Paluzzo, despite his testimony, was far from an innocent bystander in these events. he ultimately pleaded guilty to his own role in the murder, acknowledging his participation. Yet, for all of Paluzzo's claims, the government was unable to provide definitive proof that Paluzzo had indeed met with Bellomo in person to receive the order. Without concrete evidence tying Bellomo directly to Coppola's disappearance and presumed death, the murder charge began to crumble. Lacking the solid proof needed to convict Bellomo of such a serious crime, the government decided to offer him a plea deal instead. In 2007, Bellomo accepted the government's offer, pleading guilty to a much lesser charge of mail fraud rather than facing the full weight of the murder charge. This plea deal dramatically reduced the potential consequences Bellomo would face. He was sentenced to just 1 additional year in prison, as opposed to the 4 years he might have received if convicted on the original charges. One poignant moment during the court proceedings came when Bellomo's daughter, Sabrina, stood before the judge. With her 3 brothers at her side, she made an emotional plea to Judge Louis A. Kaplan, speaking tearfully about the impact her father's imprisonment had already had on their family. She described how Bellomo's incarceration had caused him to miss many key milestones in her life, including her high school, college, and even law school graduations. On December 1, 2008, Liborio Barney Bellomo walked out of prison and re-entered a criminal underworld that had dramatically shifted since the last time he was a free man. The Mafia landscape was no longer what it used to be. Informants, once a rare and despised breed in organized crime, now seemed to be everywhere, threatening the very structure of the Mafia's secrecy. Even worse for the crime families, a growing number of mob bosses had turned on their own underlings, flipping in exchange for leniency from the government. Meanwhile, the FBI and NYPD, which had once dedicated significant resources to taking down mobsters, were scaling back their organized crime units. Their focus was shifting toward combating terrorism and the rise of violent street gangs, leaving a somewhat changed playing field for the Mafia. As Bellomo returned to the streets, many considered him the most obvious candidate for the top leadership position in the Genovese family. He had been groomed for power by none other than Vincent Chin Gigante, the last of the old-school Mafia bosses who had controlled the family with an iron fist for years. Bellomo had the perfect combination of traits for leadership: the right credentials, the deep knowledge of the Mafia's inner workings, a reputation built over decades, and, crucially, the respect that came from having done his time behind bars without turning informant. According to anonymous law enforcement sources, as reported by Jerry Capisai's Gangland News, Bellomo had not only reclaimed his position within the Genovese family but had also solidified his role as the official boss of the organization. These sources claimed that, like Gigante before him, Bellomo was employing a system of intermediaries to insulate himself from direct involvement in the day-to-day operations of the family. Capo Peter P. Red Di Chiara was allegedly acting as Bellomo's street boss, serving as the go-between for Bellomo and the family captains. This method of management was reminiscent of the way Gigante had used Anthony Fat Tony Salerno to distance himself from the family's criminal activities, passing orders and information through trusted associates rather than taking any direct actions himself. In addition to his alleged leadership of the Genovese family, Bellomo was said to have built up a significant real estate empire, quietly amassing substantial rental income. Law enforcement sources indicated that Bellomo owned several apartment buildings in the Bronx and northern suburbs, properties valued in the millions of dollars. These sources noted that Bellomo's real estate portfolio generated a steady stream of income every month, allowing him to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. When he wasn't residing in his properties up north, Bellomo was reportedly spending time at his luxurious condo on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach, suggesting that his interests spanned far beyond New York. Bellomo's financial dealings didn't end with real estate. He was also believed to have significant investments in construction companies, which he used to rehabilitate and refurbish the rundown apartment buildings he acquired. These business ventures allowed him to keep a low profile while still generating considerable wealth, further solidifying his status as a powerful figure in both the criminal and legitimate worlds. Despite these allegations about Bellomo's continued role in the Genovese family and his financial ventures, law enforcement had yet to pin any criminal charges on him. As one anonymous source candidly told Gangland News, "I'm not saying we can prove he's committed a crime. but there's no doubt that he's the boss of the crime family. This statement highlighted the difficulty of prosecuting high-ranking mafia members like Bellomo, who had become experts at distancing themselves from the illicit activities that kept their criminal enterprises running. While the authorities continued to monitor his activities, Bellomo remained an elusive figure, navigating both his underworld empire and legitimate business interests with remarkable discretion. In this new mafia world, Liborio Bellomo had managed to adapt, maintaining his power and influence in a way that seemed both old-fashioned and cutting-edge. His ability to balance the brutal realities of organized crime with the lucrative opportunities of real estate and construction made him a formidable presence, and his survival in a world where snitches were plenty and bosses turned on their own was a testament to his enduring leadership.